Let's embellish some paintbrushes. There was a little before and after real quickly. These handles of these paintbrushes have been pre-painted with a chalk style paint. The reason for that was because I had intended for them to be decoupaged, but in this situation we're using a transfer from Iron Orchid Designs. I think that's Santa's Hollow, but I'm not positive. It helps if you clip the edges right here with some scissors so that you can curve it around the side of the handle. It is often helpful to seal your chalk style paint with a clear coat before you add the transfer, and then you really want that clear coat to dry for 24 hours. But honestly, these paintbrushes were painted years ago, so the paint is good and dry on there. So we were good to go with adding the transfer. I used some heavy body gel and painted it on the ferrule part of the paintbrush and then just started wrapping the twine around it. I gave it a little press just to make sure that it was good and stuck on there. Then I'm going to add a bow. This is the Victoriana mold from Iron Orchid Designs, and I'm using some air dry clay. The clay is also IOD, I should have mentioned that. You can use a little bit of cornstarch or baby powder in your mold to kind of help it release, especially if you have a brand new pack of clay or it's super sticky. I'm going to press up from underneath the mold, trying to release the casting, and then I flip it over and use gravity to help get the rest of it out. I'm going to use the Pentart Pigment Fix with their super red mica powder, and I actually mixed it together in what was left in my Pigment Fix container because there was just a little bit in the bottom. I am painting the clay while it is wet, and I'm also going to glue it in place at the same time. I'm using the heavy body gel as well for this one. Because the clay is wet, you do need to be gentle with it. I'm using Pentart's Gilding Wax in Gold along with a brush to just very lightly hit the tops of the ribbon design to bring out some of the details. Then I'm using Pentart's water-based varnish in the glossy finish to seal in the transfer. I went ahead and dried it before adding some more gilding waxes and embellishing everything. I did use the Pentart Umber Antique Wax to antique the brush as well as the transfer a bit. I am applying it with my finger. You could apply it with a dry cloth as well, and you'll see where I take a paintbrush and I get right next to the ferrule to add some there as well. Here's a little tip for painting those large hole beads. Add a little bit of tape to a skewer, and then you can slip the bead on there and it should get really tight. That way you can hold the skewer while you're painting the bead. Another tip is if you sort of pounce while you're painting, you'll create some texture. So when you add the gilding wax, which I'm doing here, it will pick up on all the raised texture that you created while you were painting. Gives it a lot more interest that way. Here I'm going to put my finger right up against the skewer and actually spin the bead so that I can get that gilding wax right at the top and the bottom of the bead. And then just tie your bead on and we'll call this one done. For the next two brushes, we're going to decoupage the handles. And with all of these brushes, we'll utilize some of the same techniques. I crumpled up the tissue paper because I want it to have some texture later when I add the gilding waxes, just like I showed you on that painted bead. I'm using Pentart's Decoupage Varnish and Glue as my decoupage medium, and you will just paint some of that on. Add your tissue paper. Again, I created some darts so that it would be easier for me to fold the paper over the curves. Now, I wasn't super precise with measuring my tissue paper and putting it on perfectly. I was fine having things overlap. It does create a different shade because you're overlapping the papers, but this is mainly the back of the brush, and our focus is going to be on the ferrule, so you're not really going to notice the overlapping of the tissue paper. I did dry it before moving on to the next step because of course I needed to hold on to the handle and I needed that to be completely dried. In this situation, I ended up using the Tight Bond Quick and Thick Wood Glue to attach the twine, whereas on the first one I used heavy body gel. Either works fine. I actually wanted to use both so that I could experiment and see which one was better. I can't say either was better, so just use what you have on hand. Now you'll decide on some embellishments. I wanted to use snowflakes because the handle was blue. Because I had already used the Tight Bond on this particular brush, I just went ahead and used the Tight Bond to attach the snowflakes to the twine. Now I'll start enhancing the details. I'm using Pentart's gilding wax. I think this is chameleon white gold, but it could be sparkling silver. Now I'm going to add some snow paste, and I am using a palette knife to apply it. I put some on the bristles to make it look like there was snow on the end of that. Honestly, I don't love it. I might have considered leaving it off, but I do love it around the handle, and I'm putting it on basically in a pounce and smooth motion. That way it creates some texture and really mimics what the snow looks like. And then you'll have to decide how much you want to put on. You might want to put just a little bit, and you might want to add a whole lot. It's totally up to you. Now I did go ahead and dry this before I started adding some gilding wax. Honestly, I'm not sure if that is sparkling silver in the chameleon gilding wax or if it was the white gold. Use them both. I did use the end of my skewer to go ahead and bust out the hole in the tissue paper. You just want to be really gentle, especially if your tissue paper is not completely dried. And then I added the extra twine and a bead. Now, of course, it's going to be a whole lot easier to paint your bead before you add it to your twine, but sometimes you don't really know you're going to paint it until you decide to paint it, which is what happened here. So I'm using the Pentart Pigment Fix with their metal pigment and sparkling silver, and it sparkles like you would not believe. That stuff is awesome. Bonus, it also dries super quickly, and I had leftovers, so I started painting just about everything that was laying around. Or is that lying around? I never remember. Now on to our third and final brush. I'm using a Paper Designs rice paper, but I don't remember what the name of it is. I'll try and find the name and add it to the video. I did not tear my paper very well. I actually tore it a little short, but I'm not super worried about it because I'm going to just add a little extra and nobody will really notice. Again, I'm adding the darts because it makes it easier to fold over the curves of the brush. I am using the Pentart Decoupage varnish and glue again for all my decoupaging. I'm going to trim off the excess, and I will have some spots that are short, and I think I actually tear the paper back on the left side, and I tear that a little short. But I'll come in with some gilding waxes later and hide that, or even I think I used some white paint maybe, or some snow paste. The point is, it's very forgiving. Just add a little bit more decoupage paper where you need to. You know the drill by now. We're going to add some embellishments, and I'm going to use the Iron Orchid Designs Winter Forage mold along with their air dry clay. One of the reasons why I'm using air dry clay is because I can form it around the shape of the brush a bit. I will say that there are some delicate pieces on this one, and they do tend to break, especially if you move it around a whole lot like I have done. One cool thing about the clay, though, is you can usually match it up and kind of smush it together and make it work, and nobody will notice. I did go ahead and pop this whole thing in the dehydrator for, I don't know, about 5 minutes, just so I could decrease the chance of losing all my detail as I painted. So why didn't I glue it to the brush before painting? Well, that's because I can't paint that well, and I didn't want to get green paint all over the Embellished paintbrush. So I need to mention that I was using the Pentart acrylic paint in the matte finish, and I did add water to it. I added water to it so that it would flow better and get down into all the crevices and the details of the clay. I added a little bit of brown paint just where the branches were showing. I am going to attach it to the big paintbrush using the Pentart Heavy Body Gel. I am doing this after I dried the paint that I had applied. That way I don't get it all over myself. As you can see, it's already all over my fingers. So I'm going to glue everything in place, and I'm going to piece those broken pieces together. And now we'll get back to embellishing again. I'm going to use a lighter green paint with a paintbrush, and I want to keep my paintbrush as flat as possible on the top of the casting so that I can bring out the detail in that. Then I'm adding some white acrylic paint to mimic some snow just on the tips of the greenery, and I want to add some snow to the handle. And then of course I'm going to add some more gilding waxes just because it adds a touch of bling and brings out all the details. So you can use varying colors, as much or as little as you want. The other thing is that you can always add other embellishments to this. Maybe you add a jingle bell or some other actual greenery to it. You get to embellish these as much or as little as you want. Do whatever makes you happy. I did add some of the sparkling silver paint that I had mixed up with the metal pigments and the pigment fix. add a bead and call it done, but you can always add whatever extras you want to your brushes. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Jengi with Louisiana Creations.